Investment executive Louise Gallagher had no intentions of mixing work and play in August of 1998. The 44-year-old single mother from Calgary, Canada, knew what her priorities were.
I had two amazing young daughters, Alexis and Lisanne, who were 12 and 10 years old, and I really needed to focus on them.
But her attention shifted that fall when a new client pulled up on the scene.
It was the company that manufactured kit cars. And I had gone to talk to this company that was looking to go public.
And when Louise met the company's senior partner, 45-year-old Conrad Cheney, she was instantly charmed.
When I first met Conrad, I shook his hand and, I had that sense that I'd met him before. And I said,
"We met before? You look really familiar."
He looked deeply into my eyes and said, "Oh no, if we'd ever met before, I'd never have let you go." And I thought, ooh, wow, that's quite the line.
When Louise told me about meeting this wonderful man, she described it to me as almost a magnetic force. She was mesmerized by him.
So when Conrad asked Louise out on an official date, she decided it couldn't hurt to mix a little pleasure with business.
We went to one of my favorite restaurants, and Conrad was really charming. He spent a lot of time telling me how beautiful I am. The flattery was a little overwhelming, but I couldn't deny my attraction to him.
But as Louise blushed, Conrad suddenly turned pale.
Midway through the dinner, suddenly Conrad got really shaky and started to have, belabored breathing. I had no idea what was going on. He got up from the table and made a phone call, and then two guys from his plant came and they left. I was feeling really unnerved. To disappear like that, it's very strange.
Several days passed before Louise finally heard from Conrad, and his explanation created more questions than answers.
Conrad called and told me that he had been quite ill. I asked him what it was, but he wouldn't talk about it. It was clearly distressing him. I was definitely worried about him.
Over the next few weeks, however, Louise's concerns were overshadowed by Conrad's charm.
Conrad was the ultimate romantic. He sent this huge bouquet of flowers one day with a note that just said, "From one of your greatest admirers." So I was falling hard for him.
I thought he was really charismatic. I could tell my mom was genuinely falling for this man, and so to see her find someone was really exciting for us.
After 3 months of dating, Conrad treated Louise to a spontaneous weekend getaway. And the surprises didn't stop there.
We got there and were at dinner, and he pulled a ring out of his pocket. I mean, it was stunningly beautiful. I was shocked. And I said, "This is way too soon. We need to just take this slowly. There's all the time in the world."
That's when Conrad made a dire confession.
He said, "I have a heart condition. If I don't take care of it,
Could be dead by Christmas."
just a couple of months away." I was stunned. I couldn't believe that here's my Prince Charming and he's gonna die.
Conrad told Louise the only thing that could save him was an experimental surgery in California. So that night, Louise accepted Conrad's marriage proposal.
I didn't know if he would survive this surgery. But how could I say no to a man who loves me so deeply and needs me? I felt that I had to do this for him.
But Conrad's heart wasn't the only thing in trouble. And before long, Louise would find herself drawn into a dark underworld that she couldn't escape.
Louise had no idea what or who was out there, and she was terrified.
We were blindsided when things began to unravel.
I was in too deep, and it wasn't going to stop until they had what they wanted.
In the winter of 1998, Louise Gallagher was devastated to learn from her fiancé, Conrad Cheney, that he had a rare heart disease and his time was running out.
Conrad told me that he had 3 months to live. Needless to say, I wanted to spend every moment with him that I could.
But according to Conrad, with a risky surgery scheduled in the coming weeks, he was too busy to spend much time with Louise. Still, Conrad was there for Louise when it mattered most. When she needed knee surgery that November, it was Conrad who came to her rescue.
When I was released from the ER, Conrad was right there to pick me up. But as I got in the car, I saw him pick something heavy off the front seat and move it into the back seat. I thought it was a gun. When I mentioned it to him, he reassured me that it was just a toy. And it was something left over from his daughter's Halloween event or something. I laughed at myself because that was just really weird of me to even think that.
After spending New Year's Day together, Louise said a sad goodbye to Conrad as he left for his surgery.
I'd asked if I could go to California to be there, but he said that that wouldn't be a good thing because he needed to conserve his energy. So I remember feeling so lost because I knew he may or may not survive.
Finally, 4 days later, Louise received a call, but it wasn't from Conrad.
It was his associates calling me to say that they believed it was a success. They said he wasn't able to talk. They were trying to keep him really quiet and calm.
She was relieved that he'd made it through the surgery, but still very frustrated to be here in Calgary. She really wanted to be there with him.
So Louise was overjoyed when her fiancé returned the following month and said he was fully recovered.
I was just ecstatic to be with him. But I must admit, he looked really healthy for a guy who'd had this crazy, risky surgery. But I just decided to let it go.
But what Louise couldn't let go was the feeling she was inching closer to the bottom of Conrad's priority list.
Conrad was always too tired from recovering or too busy catching up at work. And I began to feel more pushed to the side.
Louise's feelings of doubt were replaced with dread when Conrad gave her some crushing news.
I was sound asleep and the phone rang. It was about 1:30 in the morning. And I answered the phone, and all I could hear was Conrad crying.
Sorry, Louise. Are you all right?
And what Conrad said next would force Louise into a prison of fear and paranoia that would change her life forever.
It was like a living hell for her.
When he said those words, it was like someone kicked the air right out of me.
In February of 1999, Louise Gallagher received a frantic phone call from her fiancé, Conrad Cheney, that turned her entire world upside down.
All he would say was, "I'm so sorry, I've put you in harm's way."
Sorry, Louise. I'm sorry.
And he told me that he was part of an organized crime family and that they had discovered his love for me. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that it was true.
According to Conrad, his mafia family was angry that he was in love with someone outside their trusted circle.
Oh my God.
After all, with pillow talk comes loose lips.
I didn't have any secrets to share, but Conrad would say they don't believe that. And he said he had received an envelope, and in the envelope there were 3 bullets, and one for me and one for each of my daughters. It was a warning that we were in danger. I just remember this feeling of being absolutely terrified.
Louise thought a call to the police was their only hope, but Conrad had other plans.
He said, if you go to the police, they will know. And that's what would trigger them to kidnapping the girls.
Terrified and unable to sleep that night, Louise thought back to her relationship with Conrad. And suddenly, all the pieces came together.
The gun made sense. I just thought to myself, oh my God, it must not have been a toy gun at all. So I was angry with myself because I put my daughters in this situation. And it was all my fault. And I didn't know what to do.
To keep her daughters safe, Louise kept the mafia threat to herself, but slowly the secret ate away at her.
This was not something I felt that they needed to carry, so I had to pretend like everything was just fine.
But soon after, the threats against Louise seemed to become a reality.
One day, one of my neighbors came over and she said, I saw somebody sneaking around your car. And I phoned Conrad, and he immediately sent his associates over to look for bombs under the car. They never found anything, but it was just this constant, unsettling fear.
Louise's only peace of mind was that Conrad had her followed everywhere for her protection.
I thought it was scary and unsettling, but he had had me followed, and he always knew where I was. But he was protecting me and my daughters.
Later that summer, the stress of the situation caused Conrad's health to take another grim turn.
I got a phone call from one of his associates saying that Conrad was in California in hospital and that they were going to put him on life support system. Part of my mind went to this place that said, Conrad is protecting me and my daughters, and as long as Conrad is alive, then my daughters are safe. But if he died, I just didn't know what was going to happen. I was terrified.
Within days of learning of Conrad's condition, Louise ran into a friend at a local coffee shop. Alone and afraid, she broke down and told him about her fiancé in a coma in California.
My friend agreed he wouldn't tell anyone, but a few days later, I received a phone call from a woman who was a friend of my friend, and she just said, my daughter Rebecca is talking to a man on life support in California as well, and his name is Conrad. And I thought, no, that can't be.
Flooded with emotions, Louise arranged to meet the woman that very day at her home and discovered Rebecca's Conrad and her Conrad were one and the same.
She just broke down, and I just got really angry. It was like someone stabbed me in the heart, and I was in shock.
Enraged, the two women immediately drove to Conrad's office to demand information on his condition and whereabouts. And what they found was appalling.
We walked straight into Conrad's office, and sure enough, there he was, sitting behind his desk. He should be on life support, but he's not. He's sitting there.
Who is this?
Rebecca just started yelling at him.
I'm done.
But I was just absolutely speechless.
Louise may have been at a loss for words, but Conrad wasn't.
He said that he had lied about being on life support to protect us. He hoped it would somehow shake the mafia off of his trail. He had started seeing Rebecca in the hopes that it would take the mafia's attention off of me.
I'm leaving. It's over with me.
That it didn't change the fact that he was cheating, and I was devastated. Conrad said that he was going to end everything with Rebecca and reminded me of what could happen if I broke up with him.
If Louise walked away and then something happened to one of her daughters, she'd never forgive herself. She couldn't take that chance.
Conrad told Louise he ended it with Rebecca, and for the next 3 years, Louise stayed under Conrad's thumb, always fearful of when his mafia family would make their move.
My sister and I realized that Conrad was toxic.
You have to break up with him.
It was really clear that she had no intention of leaving him, so we went to live with my dad.
That was the moment my heart just broke. They didn't know I was only staying with Conrad for their own protection. That it was best for them that they stay with their dad, because with me, they would be in danger.
By January 2003, the strain and threats were becoming too much. So Conrad came up with a solution. The couple would steal away in the middle of the night to the Canadian countryside, where no one, not even the mafia, could find them.
All I could think of was that I had to get him away from the people I loved. So I just went with him.
But soon Louise would discover that the mafia was the least of her worries. There was something much closer and much more dangerous to fear.
She had no idea what Conrad had in store for her. She never saw it coming.
My biggest fear was that I'd never be able to tell her that I still loved her.
I remember thinking, he's gonna kill me. Today's the day.
the spring of 2003, Louise Gallagher was convinced that she and her fiancé, Conrad Cheney, would be safe from the mafia by hiding out in the Canadian wilderness.
For 3 months, we stayed in a bed and breakfast out in the country. But Conrad was acting so different. He would scream and he would remind me of how all of it was my fault. I was just terrified. I just thought he was going to kill me because he had to get rid of me. And I kept waiting for him to do it.
After almost 4 months of hiding, they had some unexpected visitors.
I was in a panic. I thought the police were going to tell me that something had happened to my daughters and that this, all of it, had been for nothing.
Louise was shocked and relieved to learn that it wasn't her daughters that were in trouble. It was Conrad.
They had a warrant and they started to read off the list of charges and they told him he was under arrest. And I thought, who is this man?
Conrad wasn't wanted by the mafia. He was wanted by the law for charges of breaking and entering, fraud, and forgery. And thanks to Louise's loved ones, police were able to track him down.
When Louise vanished, we had a sense of the peril she was in. So we went to the police and we told them that we knew she was with Conrad.
The police had warrants out for Conrad's arrest, so they knew that if they found Louise, then they would find Conrad. So they managed to track Louise down through a check that she had written.
And when they did, Louise was dumbfounded to find that nothing about her fiancé was as it seemed.
Conrad presented this image of a very, very successful business when in fact it was crumbling. It was close to bankruptcy. And that's what led him to open cell phone accounts in his daughter's name. He had purchased a car in his aunt's name, and they filed charges against Conrad.
This lightning bolt hit me, and it wasn't until then that I realized just how deeply rooted Conrad's lies were.
It turned out Conrad wasn't just broke and a fraud. He was a cheat and a stalker as well.
Conrad told Louise he was going to break up with Rebecca, but he kept seeing her. She tried to break up with him. He didn't like that, so he began stalking Rebecca, harassing her. He broke into her home, and she had him charged for that.
Police took Conrad into custody, and Louise's family brought her back to safety and to her daughters.
My sisters and my mom had flown them out to Vancouver to see me. And it was so magical. Alexis and Lisanne are the reason I'm alive today.
I don't think I could put into words how much I love my mom and how thankful I am that she made it through.
With Conrad behind bars, Louise learned the truth from police and finally realized she was just a pawn in his sick game.
The only heart condition Conrad ever had was that he didn't have a heart. He was not part of an organized crime family. They were not these evil men waiting out there and willing to kidnap the girls. Everything he told me was a lie. I felt used and I felt empty and I felt devastated.
In July of 2003, Conrad Cheney pled guilty to fraud, forgery, and breaking and entering. He was sentenced to 2 years, 1 month, and 26 days in federal prison.
This wasn't about a love affair gone bad. It was about abuse. They didn't believe evil existed, but I believe evil does exist now.
Today, Louise has healed from her experience, and she's stronger than ever.
I have gained back my self-respect, and I've gained my daughters back. And we have a relationship that is stronger and is filled with love and caring.
The light is definitely back in my mom's eyes, and I don't think that there will ever be anything that could extinguish that again.
I can't stop an abuser being who they are, but I can't stop their abuse of my life. Nothing can destroy me as long as I stand true to me.
In the fall of 1999, 30-year-old Texan Christy Smith couldn't deny that after 10 years of marriage, the magic was missing.
There was no excitement, there was no passion. So all of a sudden I found myself separated with a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. But I was very excited to start dating, to get back out there.
So it seemed fortuitous when that October, she and her best friend Crystal ran into an old high school friend, Randy Cooper, at a local bar in Fort Worth.
I had a very big crush on Randy when we were in high school, and I just thought he was gorgeous.
So when Randy mentioned that he was recently divorced, he had Christy's full attention.
Randy was working odd jobs, just anything to make money. But he was just as gorgeous as I remember.
As the three friends reconnected, however, it seemed Randy had his eyes set on Crystal.
Randy was attractive, and he was so funny. So I decided to go ahead and give him a chance to go ahead and go out with him.
I would have wished it was me, but it was fun being around him. After the night we met, we became very good friends.
But the following week, after one date with Randy, Crystal decided he wasn't the man for her.
I met him at a restaurant, and within 5 minutes of him telling me that he was in prison,
I don't know, don't worry about it.
I thought, this man is weird and crazy. I told Christy that I knew that this was not a man I would ever date.
She just thought he was too wild. And Randy would tell me stories that just seemed unreal. I wasn't really surprised because I really knew Crystal and that he wouldn't be her type. But it didn't bother me at all. It actually intrigued me. Bye.
So when Christy dropped by Randy's house a few weeks later, she was excited when he hinted that he wanted more than a friendship.
Crystal just doesn't get my humor.
He said, but you do. He said, and we have so much fun together. He was interested in actually dating me. I was just on cloud nine.
Over the next month, Christy began seeing Randy regularly, despite her friends' disapproval.
The more I tried to get Christy to stay away from Randy, the closer they got. So I did not hang out with Christy while they were together.
Randy always said Crystal's just jealous. It bothered me when Crystal would talk about Randy because I was crazy in love. We had so much fun together.
But the icing on the cake was seeing how great Randy was with her kids.
Randy was fun to be around. He would spend time with us, not just my mom. He would tell us jokes and would always cut up with us.
He even kept Christy entertained with his over-the-top storytelling.
One morning, Randy said, have you ever heard of possum and snake? And I said, no. So he told me that a possum comes up and there's a snake by the river.
And the snake's cold.
Tells the possum, will you please let me in your pouch to get warm? If you'll help me, I won't bite you. So the possum lets him in his pouch, gets him across the river.
And as soon as he does, the snake curls up to strike. And the possum says, wait a minute, I thought you were gonna hurt me. And the snake says, I'm a snake, stupid. What did you think?
Then the snake struck the possum and killed it. I had no idea why Randy told me that story.
What does that mean? What is this?
I just didn't get it. But Randy kept me on my toes. And I loved it, every bit of it.
So after 2 months of dating, when Randy asked her if he could move in, Christy was ecstatic.
We always wanted to be together, and the children seemed to really like him. And so he moved in. I was a really lucky girl.
But Christy had no idea her luck was about to run out when Randy's wild imagination would become her terrifying reality.
His behavior had changed so drastically.
He had a plan and nothing was going to stop him.
I saw the joy he took in causing pain. He was just evil.
February of 2000, Christy Smith had been separated from her husband for 1 year when her new boyfriend, Randy Cooper, moved in with her and her 2 kids.
My ex-husband did want me back, and he was very upset about Randy living in the house. But I was so happy to have everyone I loved under one roof. When I was with Randy, I felt like nothing in the world could harm me, nothing.
But a week later, Christy became troubled when Randy made an odd discovery.
So I go out in the garage, and he's got a handful of, like, empty chip wrappers, empty candy bar wrappers.
What is this?
He said he had found them all in the attic.
There's piles of this stuff.
He said it almost looks like somebody could be staying in the attic. I thought, oh no, that's crazy. There's no way. So I just kind of, blew it off.
Then the following week, Randy came home with more disturbing news.
Randy said that my ex-husband had followed him home,
He was wearing a disguise in the car.
and he was wearing some type of disguise. I was shocked. I was like, there's no way. My ex had not a mean bone in his body. But Randy insisted it was my ex-husband. So I asked my ex, you're not parking at the end of the street, are you? And he said, no, why would I do that? So I thought Randy was just blowing this all out of proportion because he had a very wild imagination.
Christy was starting to seriously worry about her boyfriend.
He started getting a lot more irritated about things. Like if the children left the lights on, he would take the light bulb out.
You turned the lights off.
I thought it was really weird for doing something innocent like leaving the lights on. It seemed like his mood would change at the drop of a dime.
Don't do it again.
He just wasn't the happy-go-lucky Randy that I was used to.
Electricity?
I was worried that I had just fallen for the fairy tale and that it just wasn't gonna work.
But on Valentine's Day, her concerns soon subsided when Randy's doting nature returned.
My ex-husband had taken the kids for the whole week, so Randy would just do romantic things. I got my old Randy back again.
And on February 23rd, nothing would top Randy's display of affection.
We had went to the bar, and we had got there. He looked at me and said,
Today's gonna be a special day.
he gave me a kiss, and he walked up onto the stage, and he said,
Hey, I'm gonna need everybody's attention.
I have found the love of my life.
Christy, come on up here.
And he said, Christy, will you marry me? I was just so excited. It was so unexpected. And I said yes, of course. And he just seemed like he was on cloud nine.
The lovebirds ordered a round of drinks for all, and the celebration began. But the excitement quickly caught up to Christy.
And I told Randy, I said, my head was spinning, and I started having problems with my stomach. And he said, well, let's get you home, babe.
When they arrived, Randy gently led her to the bedroom.
I said, well, go on in and put on something cute and lay down, and he would bring me some aspirin. So I went in and put on a negligee. I was trying to stay awake, and I guess I kind of dozed off a little bit.
Moments later, Christy awoke to an unrecognizable voice.
Wake up, bitch! I thought you were my angel, but you're just a lying whore!
After her boyfriend proposed on February 23, 2000, Christy Smith dozed off peacefully, but woke up in a nightmare.
Wake up, bitch! I'm gonna torture you! You're gonna wish you were dead!
And he said, you're gonna know pain like you've never felt pain.
I thought you were my angel!
Then he reached over and he punched me in the face. And I was just shocked.
Before Christy could even react, Randy grabbed a bat.
He hit me in the head with a bat. I kept putting my hands over my head. And he said, better put them hands down. And I started screaming, and I kept asking him why. Randy said I kissed a male friend of mine at a time before me and him had started dating. And he told me that he was going to torture me until he knew the truth.
Did you kiss him?
What he was asking didn't make sense. Why would he care if I kissed this man before we dated? And I said, I love you, Randy. I would never cheat on you. And he said that that was a lie. And then he doubled up his fist and he hit me.
You're lying to me!
The pain was unreal. And my face was bleeding. And I kept telling him I didn't do it. But I'll tell you I did. If you'll just stop. Just stop. And he just laughed and swung again. Then he choked me till I lost consciousness. And I woke up, and he was slapping me in the face. And he said, you're not getting away that easy. I thought Randy was going to kill me.
Randy was unrelenting as he continued to torture Christy over the next several hours.
There were tools on the dresser. And he picked up this belt buckle. And he hit me from head to toe. He picked up the wire cutters and the pliers, and he started to cut my nipples off. It was just the most unbelievable pain.
Then Randy suddenly paused to show Christy his handiwork. Just as hope seemed lost, Christy's thoughts turned to her children.
I loved my kids too much, but I was not gonna let him win. I was not. I had to be there for my babies. In that moment, I knew that if I didn't make it to that phone, that there was no hope. And the thought came to me, I told Randy, let's just try to call my friend, that guy that you were accusing me of kissing, and he'll tell you the truth. He'll tell you if I kissed him or not. And he said, if you can't make it into the kitchen, you're not gonna have any idea what pain is.
Christy crawled to the kitchen to get to the phone.
And as soon as I got a dial tone, I called 911.
911, what's your emergency? Hello, are you there? Hello?
On February 24th, 2000, after suffering hours of unimaginable torture at the hands of her fiancé, Randy Cooper, Christy Smith could only hope her attempt to call 911 had worked.
I didn't know if I got through or not, but Randy was screaming he was gonna kill me before anybody could get there.
Seconds later, 911 made a routine follow-up call.
Hello? Hello? No, actually my son did. Yeah, well, actually, I picked up the telephone.
Then I just screamed like nobody's ever screamed. And he hung up the phone, he started screaming at me. I told him, just take my car, just go. I don't care, just go.
As Randy searched for her keys, Christy made it to the bathroom.
I got the window open and I got the door locked. And that's all I had left. The pain was just so overwhelming.
Two patrol officers were dispatched. When the officers pulled up, Randy was walking out the front door. They noticed that he had blood on his clothing and blood on his hands. and he kept trying to tell the officers that children had made the 911 call.
My kids, they might have been playing with the phone, you know.
But they heard faint screams coming from within the house. Officers detained Randy outside, and the other officers made their way into the house.
Police discovered Christy barely conscious.
Randy's trying to kill me.
She was bloody and bruised, and she was telling them that Randy was trying to kill her. She had significant injuries. Something horrible had gone on in the home. I haven't seen any assault like that ever. Randy told the officers that Christy had come home in that condition, but it was obvious to officers that a disturbance had gone on there. They found blood in the bedroom, ball bats, a hammer, pliers, apparently items that Randy had used on Christy at the time. From that point forward, Randy would no longer speak to the police and ask for an attorney.
Randy Cooper was immediately arrested while Christy was rushed to the nearest hospital.
Christy had skull fractures, a broken jaw, broken teeth. She had a broken arm and significant bruising and cuts all up and down her body. I was amazed that she was still alive.
I knew that Randy was crazy, but I didn't think anybody could ever be that evil or how anybody could do that to another person.
It was really horrifying to find out what happened. I talked to my mom on the phone while she was in the hospital. She told us that everything was okay and that she'd be home.
While awaiting Randy's trial over the next 2 years, Christy healed physically, but emotionally she was still suffering.
I remember just still being in shock. It didn't make any sense how he could hurt me that bad. Because I loved him completely and with all my heart.
On July 9th, 2002, Randy Cooper pled not guilty to the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
At the trial, I learned that Randy's ex-wife had been beaten repeatedly. He had been very threatening to women for years and years.
I would describe Randy's actions as sociopathic, especially given light that he tried to lie to officers. I believe if Randy had actually killed Christy, that later down the road, other people would be in his crosshairs as well.
Christy couldn't help but wonder if Randy had been planning the attack all along.
There was no real reason behind what he did because he thought I kissed a male friend of mine. It was like he was grasping at a reason to hurt me. I believe Randy was trying to set up my ex-husband from the very beginning. I think he saw that there was a possible way to kill someone and get away with it. I think that the whole time he had been planning to torture me.
And now she understood why Randy might have chosen her instead of her best friend.
I think he saw me as an easy mark because I was trusting. All I kept thinking is how I could have been so gullible, how I could have been so wrong.
On July 11th, 2002, Randy Cooper was found guilty and sentenced to 99 years in prison.
I loved him so much, and I would have done anything except die for him. Randy won the battle, but I won the war because I lived.
Today, after countless surgeries, Christy still suffers a great deal from her injuries.
I have my good days and my bad days. I have to deal with unbelievable pain. And it is a limited life that I have, but at least I have one.
It's going to be a struggle for her the rest of her life. But the motivating drive for Christy during this whole ordeal has been her children. That keeps her motivated.
In hindsight, Christy finally understands what Randy meant by the possum and the snake story.
That was one of the main red flags. He was trying to give me a hint of what a snake he was. But in my Possum the Snake story, the possum is the survivor.
There is a universal understanding about the concept of home. It is supposed to be the ultimate sanctuary, the final threshold where the chaotic and unpredictable nature of the outside world is firmly locked away behind a sturdy wooden door. When you turn the deadbolt and switch off the lights, you enter a private covenant of safety. You close your eyes with the inherent trust that the walls around you will stand as an impenetrable barrier against the darkness outside. But what happens when that covenant is broken? What happens when the darkness does not stay outside, but quietly, methodically, slips through the cracks of your sanctuary? The feeling of violation that follows such an intrusion is profound and lasting. It strips away the very foundation of security. This is the story of a community that had its sanctuary violently ripped away. It is a story not just of physical intrusion, but of deeply calculated psychological terror, a prolonged nightmare that descended upon a tight-knit community and forced the local justice system into an unprecedented legal battle. This is the case of Tolo Albert Bernard, a man who transformed the quiet, tropical nights of a government housing complex into a hunting ground, and whose eventual capture and trial would permanently alter the legal landscape of American Samoa. The year was 1993. The setting was Tafuna, a prominent village located on the eastern coast of Tutuila Island, the main island of the United States territory of American Samoa. Geographically isolated in the heart of the South Pacific Ocean, American Samoa is known for its breathtaking natural beauty, its deep-rooted Polynesian culture, and its generally peaceful, close-knit communities. In such a place, neighbors know one another, families are deeply interconnected, and violent crime, especially of a serial, predatory nature, is considered a shocking anomaly. Within Tafuna lies the American Samoa Government Housing Complex, commonly referred to as ASG housing. This specific area was designed to accommodate government employees and their families. By its very nature, a government housing complex is expected to be a bastion of order and safety. It is a place filled with hard-working civil servants, a community where children play outside during the day and families gather in the evenings. The houses sit close together, fostering a sense of communal vigilance. Yet, between the years 1993 and 1994, this very proximity, this expected safety, became the backdrop for a state of absolute, suffocating paranoia. As the sun set over the Pacific and the humid tropical night enveloped Tafuna, the ASG housing complex underwent a sinister transformation. The night, usually a time of rest and quiet reflection, became a period of intense dread for the female residents. A phantom was stalking the neighborhood. This was not a burglar looking for easy valuables, nor was it a random vandal committing crimes of opportunity. The police and the community soon realized they were dealing with a highly organized, highly specific serial sexual predator. His methodology was chillingly consistent, displaying a level of calculated predation that sent shockwaves of terror through every household. He had a specific target, a specific method of entry, and a specific routine of terror that he executed with horrifying precision. His targets were chosen with brutal calculation. The intruder exclusively focused his attention on apartments where women lived alone or households where only women and children were present during the night. This selection process indicated that he was likely watching, observing the routines of the residents, noting who came and went, and identifying the exact moments when his victims would be at their most vulnerable. He understood the layout of the complex and the demographics of its inhabitants. By targeting women who were physically alone or burdened with the responsibility of protecting small children, he was deliberately maximizing his psychological advantage and minimizing the risk of encountering physical resistance from another adult male. The absolute isolation of his victims within their own homes was the crucial first step in his method of operation. The women in these apartments, believing they were secure behind locked doors, were entirely unaware that they had been marked by a predator waiting patiently for the neighborhood to fall completely asleep. Perhaps the most distinctive and terrifying aspect of this predator's methodology was his physical presentation upon entering the homes. In a bizarre and deeply unsettling tactical decision, the intruder would strip off entirely, or almost entirely, before making his move. He would enter the homes completely naked or wearing nothing but basic undergarments. While this behavior might initially seem irrational or exposing, investigators quickly recognized it as a highly sophisticated, albeit deeply disturbing, countermeasure. By removing his clothing, he eliminated multiple risks associated with breaking and entering. He ensured that there would be no loose fabric to snag on window frames, jagged glass, or door hinges. He guaranteed that he would leave behind no trace evidence in the form of clothing fibers, threads, or lint that forensic teams could later analyze and trace back to his wardrobe. Furthermore, in the sticky, humid climate of American Samoa, a naked body covered in sweat or natural oils becomes incredibly difficult to grab and hold onto. If a victim or a neighbor managed to intervene and attempted to physically restrain him, his lack of clothing would allow him to slip away from their grasp like a shadow. This nakedness was not merely a psychological quirk. It was a weaponized choice designed to facilitate stealth, prevent identification, and ensure a rapid, untethered escape. The image of a completely naked, silent figure creeping through the dark hallways of a home is a detail that elevates the horror of these crimes to an unimaginable level. It represents a complete shedding of societal norms, reducing the perpetrator to a raw, predatory state. The terror of the visual intrusion was immediately followed by the threat of lethal violence. The intruder never relied solely on the shock of his presence. He came armed, bringing a crude but highly effective tool of compliance. He was known to carry a large machete, an agricultural tool common in the tropics, or he would silently procure a sharp kitchen knife from the victim's own home before entering the bedroom. The use of a weapon found at the scene demonstrates a chilling comfort level within the victim's space. He felt secure enough to navigate their kitchen in the dark before initiating his attack. As he approached his sleeping or resting victims, he would press the cold steel of the blade directly against their throats. The ultimatum was whispered in the suffocating darkness: remain absolutely silent, or be killed on the spot. This immediate, lethal threat effectively paralyzed his victims. The natural human instinct to scream for help, to alert neighbors or sleeping children, was weaponized against them. If they made a sound, they were promised death. If they remained silent, they were subjected to his assault. It was a torturous psychological trap, forcing women to endure unimaginable violations in a desperate bid to survive the night and protect the children sleeping in the adjacent rooms. Under the absolute control of the blade, the physical attacks commenced. The darkness of the unlit rooms provided a terrifying cover for his actions. The victims, unable to clearly see the face of their attacker, were subjected to aggressive groping, forced kissing, and attempted rape. The sensory deprivation of the pitch-black room, combined with the tactile horror of the assault and the constant, pressing threat of the knife, created an environment of pure trauma. Every second stretched into an eternity. The attacker used the cover of night not just to hide his identity, but to amplify the vulnerability and disorientation of the women he preyed upon. They could feel him, they could hear him, they could feel the sharp edge of the weapon, but they were robbed of the ability to look their attacker in the eye and identify him. This calculated use of darkness would later become the central focal point of the legal battle that followed his eventual capture. However, despite his careful planning and physical advantages, the predator's control was not absolute. Human resilience often shines through even in the darkest and most terrifying of moments. There were instances where the victims, despite the terrifying presence of the machete or the knife, refused to be paralyzed by fear. Driven by adrenaline, the instinct to survive, or the desperate need to protect their children, some women fought back fiercely. In other instances, the noise of the struggle managed to awaken other family members or neighbors. The moment the element of silent control was broken, the intruder's demeanor would instantly shift from predatory dominance to frantic self-preservation. He proved himself to be a coward in the face of true resistance. The moment a victim screamed or someone else entered the fray, he immediately abandoned his assault. Leveraging his lack of clothing and his knowledge of the escape routes, he would blindly launch himself toward the nearest exit. He would dive through open windows or tear open back doors, sprinting wildly into the thick tropical brush and disappearing into the blackness of the Tafuna night. He left behind no physical clothing, No clear description of his face, only the lingering scent of fear, the discarded or replaced weapon, and victims who were forever altered by the intrusion. As the attacks in the ASG housing complex continued through 1993 and into 1994, the collective anxiety of the community reached a boiling point. Women were terrified to go to sleep. Families fortified their doors and windows, improvising locks and keeping weapons close to their beds. The quiet, gentle sounds of the island night were replaced by the hyper-vigilant straining of ears, listening for the faintest rustle outside a window or the softest creak of a floorboard. The American Samoa government housing complex, once a symbol of community and security, had been turned into a hunting ground. The local authorities, the Department of Public Safety, found themselves under immense pressure from a terrified and outraged public. They were hunting a ghost, a man who left almost no physical trace, who struck in total darkness, and whose victims could barely describe him beyond the terrifying silhouette of a naked, armed man. The police knew that catching him in the act was their only real chance of stopping the reign of terror. They needed to anticipate his movements, understand his deeply ingrained patterns, and set a trap that even a shadow could not escape. The stage was being set for a confrontation in the dark, a desperate bid by law enforcement to pull the phantom into the light and uncover the identity of the man who would soon be known to the courts and to history as Tolo Albert Bernard. The profound trauma inflicted on the women of Tafuna was about to meet the relentless pursuit of justice, sparking an investigation that would ultimately challenge the very limits of the law in the territory. The burden of restoring peace to the American Samoa government housing complex rested squarely on the shoulders of the Department of Public Safety. The atmosphere within the police department mirrored the suffocating humidity of the island itself, thick with tension and the mounting pressure of public outrage. Every morning brought the dread of another potential report, another violated sanctuary, another woman left traumatized in the wake of the phantom intruder. The community was no longer just frightened, they were intensely angry. Town hall meetings and informal gatherings buzzed with anxious whispers and demanding questions. Why was this happening in a secure government area? Why could the police not catch a man who ran around completely exposed? The officers knew that traditional patrol methods, driving marked vehicles with flashing lights through the neighborhood, were utterly useless against an adversary this stealthy. The flashing lights would only serve as an early warning system for the predator, allowing him to melt back into the shadows long before a cruiser even turned onto the street. A radical change in strategy was imperative. The police needed to become as invisible as the man they were hunting. They needed to stop patrolling and start hunting. The command staff devised a grueling, high-stakes plan. They would establish a series of covert night ambushes, a coordinated stakeout operation designed to catch the perpetrator in the very act of a home invasion. This was an incredibly challenging undertaking. It required officers to completely abandon their normal routines and adapt to the nocturnal rhythms of the serial offender. Teams of plainclothes officers and tactical personnel were assigned to blend into the darkened landscape of the housing complex. They positioned themselves in unlit alleyways, crouched behind thick tropical hedges, and stationed themselves in vacant units, enduring hours of agonizing stillness. The physical toll of these stakeouts was immense. The nights in American Samoa are notoriously warm and sticky, the air thick with moisture. Officers had to battle the oppressive heat, the relentless onslaught of mosquitoes, and the overwhelming urge to sleep, all while maintaining absolute, unbroken silence. The psychological toll was equally severe. They were waiting for a monster to strike, knowing that their success depended on a woman being put in a moment of terrifying danger, hoping they could intervene fast enough to prevent a tragedy. The tension was a physical weight, pressing down on the officers as they stared into the blackness, analyzing every shifting shadow and every rustling palm frond. Weeks bled into one another, creating a blur of exhausted days and adrenaline-fueled, terrifying nights. There were numerous false alarms, moments when a stray dog knocking over a trash can or a resident simply stepping outside for a breath of air would send hearts racing and hands reaching for holstered weapons. The waiting game was agonizing, a slow, meticulous draining of morale. But the leadership insisted they hold the line. They knew the intruder's compulsion was too strong for him to stop permanently. His highly ritualized methodology, his absolute reliance on the cover of darkness, and his specific victim profile suggested an addiction to the power and terror he inflicted. It was not a matter of if he would strike again, but exactly when and precisely where. The officers in the bushes tightened their grips on their flashlights and radios, understanding that their patience was the only shield standing between the women of Tafuna and the blade of the intruder. The breaking point finally arrived in the early months of 1994. The night felt indistinguishable from the dozens that had preceded it, cloaked in the same heavy humidity and profound silence. The officers on stakeout duty were fighting the familiar battle against fatigue, their eyes straining against the darkness. Suddenly, the fragile quiet was shattered violently and absolutely. A piercing, desperate scream tore through the night air, echoing off the concrete walls of the government housing units. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, the exact sound the officers had been waiting to hear, yet the very sound they dreaded the most. It signaled that the predator had breached another sanctuary, that another woman was face to face with a nightmare. Instantly, the carefully maintained stillness of the stakeout evaporated. The hidden officers erupted from their concealed positions, their fatigue replaced by a massive surge of adrenaline. Radios crackled with urgent, hushed coordinates as multiple units converged on the source of the scream. They sprinted across dew-soaked lawns and vaulted over low fences, their flashlights cutting chaotic, bouncing swaths of light through the darkness. As they closed in on the targeted apartment, the front door burst open. The victim, acting with incredible bravery and presence of mind, had managed to scream the moment she sensed the intrusion, refusing to be silenced by the threat of the blade. Her vocal resistance had broken the intruder's cardinal rule of silent compliance, shattering his psychological control and triggering his desperate instinct to flee. From the rear of the property, an officer caught a fleeting glimpse of movement. It was exactly as the previous victims had described, a surreal and terrifying sight. A completely naked human figure was launching itself out of a back window, tumbling onto the soft earth before scrambling to its feet. The intruder did not hesitate. Bereft of clothing and completely exposed, he utilized his only remaining advantage, his intimate knowledge of the surrounding terrain. He bolted away from the illuminated house and plunged headlong into the dense, unforgiving brush that bordered the housing complex. The pursuit was immediate, chaotic, and brutal. Officers plunged into the undergrowth after the fleeing shadow, their heavy boots tramping through the thick vegetation. The tropical brush in this area was not a gentle forest. It was a tangled mess of sharp branches, thorny vines, and thick, clinging mud. The fleeing suspect, devoid of any protective clothing, crashed through the foliage with the desperate energy of a cornered animal. Branches whipped against his bare skin, vines tore at his legs, and the uneven, muddy ground caused him to stumble and slide. Yet, driven by the absolute terror of capture, he kept pushing deeper into the darkness. The pursuing officers, weighed down by their gear and uniforms, struggled to match his frantic pace. Flashlight beams darted wildly through the trees, occasionally catching the glint of sweat on bare skin before the figure vanished behind another thicket. The night air was filled with the sounds of snapping branches, heavy breathing, and the squelch of boots sinking into the wet earth. Despite his initial burst of speed, the rugged terrain and the sheer number of officers converging on the area began to close the net. The police utilized a coordinated flanking maneuver, using their radios to anticipate his trajectory through the brush. The naked man's frantic scramble grew slower, his energy depleted by the punishing environment and the relentless pursuit. Finally, trapped between an impenetrable wall of dense vegetation and the rapidly approaching beams of police flashlights, his escape route vanished. Exhausted, battered, and outmaneuvered, he collapsed into the mud. Officers swarmed the location, weapons drawn, shouting commands into the night. The phantom of the American Samoa government housing complex had finally been pinned down. As the officers pulled him from the undergrowth and secured him in handcuffs, the reality of the monster they had been hunting was laid bare beneath the harsh glare of their flashlights. He was not a supernatural entity or an invisible ghost. He was a man completely stripped of his terrifying mystique. He knelt in the dirt, completely naked, his body heaving with exhaustion. He was covered from head to toe in a thick layer of dark mud, which clung to his sweat-drenched skin. Deep red scratches and lacerations crisscrossed his chest, arms, and legs, a brutal testament to his desperate, unclad flight through the unforgiving thorny brush. He offered no further resistance, the adrenaline that had fueled his predatory strikes and his frantic escape completely drained from his system. He was hauled out of the bushes, a pitiful and dirty figure, a stark contrast to the terrifying shadow that had haunted the community for months. The suspect was immediately transported to the Central Police Station. The atmosphere in the precinct shifted from the adrenaline of the chase to the meticulous, methodical work of criminal identification. The man, now provided with a basic garment to cover himself, sat silently in the holding area, refusing to offer a cohesive explanation for his actions. But the police did not need his words. They had his physical presence, and more importantly, they had his hands. The booking process began, culminating in the crucial step of taking his fingerprints. In an era before instantaneous digital databases, the process of rolling the ink, pressing the fingers to the card, and manually analyzing the swirling ridges was a slow, deliberate task. The detectives waited with bated breath as the identification technicians went to work, cross-referencing the freshly inked prints with the extensive files of known offenders in the territory. When the match was finally confirmed, a wave of profound realization, mixed with a deep sense of institutional frustration, washed over the investigative team. The fingerprints belonged to a man known to the system. His name was Tolo Albert Bernard. The name hit the detectives like a physical blow. When they pulled his complete criminal history, the file they placed on the desk was shockingly thick. This was not a first-time offender who had suddenly snapped. Tolo Albert Bernard possessed a lengthy and deeply troubling rap sheet that painted a clear picture of an escalating predatory trajectory. His documented history revealed a persistent pattern of criminality that had inexplicably failed to result in a definitive, long-term removal from society. The pages of his file detailed numerous prior arrests and convictions for breaking and entering, a blatant disregard for the boundaries of private property. But far more concerning were the prior charges related to sexual harassment and assault. The record showed a man who had repeatedly crossed the line, engaging in predatory behaviors that foreshadowed the severe escalation seen in the Tafuna housing complex. The system had processed him multiple times, handing down lighter sentences, probations, or failing to secure convictions that truly reflected the danger he posed. He was a known entity, a man whose dark compulsions had been documented but never fully neutralized by the judicial process. The realization that the ASG housing predator was a man with a known history of similar offenses fundamentally shifted the nature of the investigation. The police had successfully captured the man responsible for the physical terror, ending the immediate threat to the community. However, the discovery of his extensive criminal past ignited a completely new, far more complex battle. The challenge was no longer about catching the phantom, it was about proving to a jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that this specific man, caught in the mud, was the exact same shadow who had terrorized women in the pitch blackness of their bedrooms. Because his victims had never clearly seen his face in the dark, the prosecution would face a monumental hurdle in the courtroom. They could not rely solely on eyewitness identification. Instead, they would have to rely on the chilling consistency of his methods. They would have to prove that his past crimes and his current crimes were inextricably linked by a unique, undeniable signature. The physical chase through the jungle had ended, but a grueling, unprecedented intellectual and legal war within the walls of the High Court of American Samoa was just about to begin. The courtroom in the High Court of American Samoa was a place of sterile, heavy formality, a sharp departure from the humid, visceral darkness of the Tafuna housing complex. As the trial of Tolo Albert Bernard approached, a palpable tension filled the air. The prosecution, led by a team of seasoned attorneys, understood that they were walking into a legal minefield. They possessed the physical person of the accused, caught in the act of fleeing from a scene of terror, but they lacked the one thing that usually anchors a conviction for sexual assault: a positive, unwavering eyewitness identification of the perpetrator's face. Because Bernard had expertly exploited the absolute darkness of the night, his victims had been robbed of the ability to provide that critical, definitive visual identification. To a defense attorney, this was a golden ticket, a gaping hole in the prosecution's case that could be exploited to foster reasonable doubt. The defense began to craft a narrative of a man who was perhaps in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught fleeing because he was scared, not because he was the serial phantom who had haunted the government housing units. Recognizing this fundamental weakness, the prosecution knew they had to be creative, bold, and technically precise. They could not simply rely on the circumstantial evidence of Bernard being caught in the mud. They needed to bridge the gap between his arrest and the specific, ritualistic nature of the crimes themselves. It was here that they turned to a powerful, albeit highly controversial, legal tool, Rule 404B of the Federal Rules of Evidence. This rule, which had been adopted into the local legal framework, dealt with the admissibility of evidence regarding prior bad acts. Under normal circumstances, the law strictly prohibits the introduction of a defendant's past criminal history. The logic is sound and foundational to the American justice system. A defendant should be judged solely on the evidence of the specific crime for which they are currently standing trial, not on their past transgressions. It prevents the state from painting a defendant as an inherently bad person, which could unfairly bias a jury against them regardless of the facts. However, the rule contains a crucial, narrow exception. Prior acts can be admitted if they serve a purpose other than proving character, such as establishing motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, or, most critically in Bernard's case, identity. The prosecution's argument rested on the concept of a signature modus operandi. They contended that the method of the crimes in Tafuna was so highly specific, so bizarrely unique, and so consistently applied across every single incident that it acted as a psychological and behavioral calling card. It was not merely a series of burglaries or random assaults. It was a distinctive, ritualized performance. The attacker's habit of stripping naked to facilitate stealth and eliminate trace evidence, the immediate use of a knife or machete to enforce silence, the targeting of isolated women in government housing, these were not disparate actions. They were the components of a single, identifiable signature. By demonstrating that Bernard had engaged in this exact same pattern of behavior in the past, the prosecution could argue that it was statistically and logically impossible for another person to have committed the Tafuna crimes. The prior acts were not being introduced to prove he was a bad person. They were being introduced as a form of forensic identification. They were essentially pieces of a behavioral fingerprint that, when combined with the circumstances of his arrest, would leave no reasonable doubt as to his identity. The courtroom battle over this motion was intense and protracted. The defense team, sensing the danger of this evidence, fought back with everything they had. They argued that the prosecution was attempting to use the defendant's past against him in exactly the way the law forbade. They insisted that the similarities between the past and present crimes were being exaggerated and that admitting such evidence would poison the minds of the BOI Tamdone, making a fair trial impossible. They painted a picture of a man being unfairly targeted by a system that was desperate for a conviction in a high-profile case. Every argument was met with a counterargument, with legal precedents being cited and debated in back-and-forth exchanges that stretched over days of pre-trial hearings. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of the potential precedent. Everyone involved understood that the court's decision would reverberate far beyond the walls of this specific trial. It would set a new standard for how similar cases would be handled in American Samoa for years to come. When the judge finally issued the ruling, the courtroom went deathly silent. The court sided with the prosecution, granting the motion to admit evidence of Bernard's prior bad acts. The judge's reasoning was sharp and precise. It was acknowledged that the risk of prejudice was real, but it was outweighed by the probative value of the evidence in establishing identity. The court affirmed that the behavioral pattern exhibited, the specific intersection of nudity, weaponry, and the systematic targeting of isolated victims, was indeed highly distinctive. It was not a common criminal trope, it was a signature. The judge concluded that the pattern was so unique that it functioned as a form of identification, providing the jury with a valid, logical basis to conclude that the person who committed the past acts was, in fact, the person who had terrorized the ASG housing complex. This ruling was a massive victory for the prosecution, but it also placed an enormous burden upon them. They had to now present this complex legal theory to a jury of 12 people, ensuring they understood that the past crimes were evidence of identity, not a judgment of character. As the trial entered its main phase, the prosecution methodically began to build their case. They did not just present the jury with the facts of the arrest, they took them on a deep dive into the psychological and behavioral consistency of the attacker. They brought in witnesses from previous cases, people who had been victims or survivors of similar attacks in the years before the Tafuna spree. Listening to these testimonies was harrowing. Each witness described the same terrifying experience: the sudden, silent entry of a naked figure in the dead of night, the presence of a blade, the threat of death to ensure silence, and the specific, calculated manner in which the attacker moved through the home. Each story added another layer of confirmation to the prosecution's signature theory. It was as if the prosecution were assembling a massive puzzle, and each piece of past testimony locked perfectly into place with the evidence of the recent crimes. The defense continued to attempt to disrupt this narrative, cross-examining the witnesses with relentless pressure, trying to find inconsistencies in their memories, trying to suggest that the traumatic nature of these events could lead to false or implanted memories. They attacked the credibility of the victims, subtly suggesting that the stress of the situation made their accounts unreliable. But the prosecution's strategy remained disciplined. They did not rely on the victim's ability to recognize the attacker's face. Instead, they focused the jury's attention on the methodology. They used expert testimony to explain the behavioral logic of the predator, the necessity of the nudity for stealth, the psychological efficacy of the blade, and the cold, predatory intent behind the selection of targets. By framing the criminal behavior as a clinical, observable pattern, they removed the reliance on the fallible human memory of a face in the dark and replaced it with the undeniable, repetitive reality of the actions themselves. The climax of the trial came when the prosecution brought together the evidence from the Tafuna arrest with the evidence of the prior acts. They presented a timeline that spanned years, showing the jury that the nightmare had not started in 1993, but had been a persistent, if intermittent, shadow in the community for a long time. The jury watched as the evidence was woven together into a single, cohesive thread. The defense's case, which had rested on the hope of a vacuum in the identification, began to unravel. They could no longer argue that it was all a coincidence, that someone else could have randomly decided to operate with the exact same, highly specific, and bizarre set of behaviors. The sheer statistical impossibility of such a scenario made the defense's argument seem increasingly fragile and hollow. The final days of the trial were heavy with anticipation. The closing arguments were masterful, each side making one last appeal to the jury. The prosecution appealed to logic, to the overwhelming weight of the behavioral evidence, and to the safety of the community. They reminded the jury that the law was not just a set of abstract rules, but a tool for truth and justice. The defense made a final, desperate plea for the protection of the defendant's rights, warning the jury against the dangers of bias and the importance of holding the state to the highest possible standard of proof. As the jury retired to deliberate, the courthouse seemed to hold its breath. The case of Tolo Albert Bernard was far more than a trial of one man. It was a confrontation between the dark reality of a serial predator and the structured, deliberate, and rigorous process of the law. The jury was now tasked with the final act of this long, painful, and complex drama, holding in their hands the responsibility to decide if the Phantom of Tafuna would be held accountable for the fear he had sown and the lives he had forever altered. The atmosphere was expectant, charged with the gravity of the decision that was soon to be reached, a decision that would not only define the fate of Tolo Albert Bernard, but also solidify the legal precedent that had been so arduously fought for and won in the halls of the High Court of American Samoa. The culmination of the trial was not merely a mechanical reading of a verdict, but a profound release of the tension that had gripped the community of Tafuna for years. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the air was dense, thick with the weight of expectation. The foreman's voice, steady and clear, pierced the silence as the verdicts were delivered one by one.
Guilty.
Guilty on counts of rape. Guilty on counts of attempted rape. Guilty on charges of burglary and assault with a dangerous weapon. For the victims who sat in the gallery, the words were a cathartic restoration of a truth they had lived in terror, a validation that the nightmare they had experienced was not a product of their own fallibility, but a series of calculated, deliberate crimes committed by the man who now sat slumped in the defendant's chair. Tolo Albert Bernard, the phantom of the government housing complex, was finally stripped of his anonymity and his ability to inflict further harm. The court, having reached this conclusion through the admission of the prior behavioral evidence, sentenced him to a term of imprisonment that reflected the gravity of his offenses. He was remanded into the custody of the Department of Corrections to serve his time within the walls of the Pago Pago Correctional Facility, effectively ending the reign of terror that had haunted the residents of ASG housing. The aftermath of the trial was a period of intense reflection for the people of American Samoa. The community began the slow, difficult process of reclaiming the sense of safety that had been so cruelly stolen from them. For the victims, the journey toward healing was just beginning, but the verdict provided a crucial measure of closure. They had been forced to relive their darkest moments in the harsh light of the courtroom, detailing the invasion of their homes and the violation of their personal sanctity, but in doing so, they had contributed to a triumph of the legal system. Their resilience and their willingness to confront their attacker were the foundational pillars upon which the entire case was built. The collective anxiety that had defined life in Tafuna began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious, guarded return to normalcy. Neighbors began to speak to one another again about things other than fear, and the hypervigilance that had made every night a battle for survival began to wane, allowing for the slow return of peaceful, undisturbed sleep. The housing complex, while still carrying the shadows of the past, started to feel like a home once more rather than a hunting ground for a predator. However, the legacy of the Tolo Albert Bernard case was far deeper than the incarceration of a single individual. It left an indelible mark on the legal fabric of the territory. The decision of the High Court to permit the use of the Rule 404(b) evidence regarding prior bad acts became a landmark in the jurisprudence of American Samoa. It established a clear, well-defined precedent that allowed future prosecutors to bridge the gap in cases where visual identification might be hampered by darkness, environmental factors, or the sheer speed of an attacker. By articulating the rigorous requirements for establishing a signature modus operandi, the court provided a roadmap for ensuring that similar serial predators could not escape justice simply because they were expert at operating in the shadows. This precedent became an essential tool for the prosecution, a beacon in the complex landscape of criminal law, ensuring that the unique characteristics of an offender's methods could be utilized to protect the community. Whenever a new case emerged where an offender utilized a highly distinctive, ritualized approach, the shadow of the Bernard case loomed, serving as a reminder of the power of behavioral evidence. In the years that followed, the legal community in American Samoa would often look back at the Bernard trial as a definitive moment of maturity for their judicial system. It was a test of how a small, tight-knit society could grapple with the complexities of a serial offender whose actions threatened the core values of peace and security. The case demonstrated that even when the traditional tools of evidence, like eyewitness testimony, were undermined by the nature of the crime, the law possessed the flexibility and the depth to adapt. It taught the investigators, the prosecutors, and the judges the importance of meticulously documenting behavioral patterns, of recognizing the subtle, repetitive signatures of predation, and of building a case that was as much about the how as it was about the who. The trial was a masterclass in forensic strategy, proving that in the absence of a face in the light, the actions performed in the darkness could themselves tell a story that stood up to the highest standards of scrutiny. The impact of the case also forced a necessary conversation about the safety of public housing and the duty of the state to protect its residents. It highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in communal living spaces and spurred discussions about security measures, better lighting, and the importance of community-based vigilance. The terror that Bernard had inflicted was not merely a personal violation of his victims. It was a violation of the entire community's sense of order. By addressing the security failings that had allowed him to roam the complex with such ease, the government took steps to ensure that such a period of sustained vulnerability would not be repeated. The story of Tafuna during those years became a part of the local consciousness, a cautionary tale about the dangers that can lurk in the shadows when a community stops paying attention to the subtle warnings, and a testament to the strength required to overcome such profound trauma. For those who worked on the case, the memory of the night in the mud, the exhaustion of the stakeout, and the grueling, high-stakes battle in the courtroom remained a cornerstone of their professional lives. The investigative team, the police officers who had waited in the heat and the darkness, the prosecutors who had navigated the complex legal minefield, and the victims who had courageously taken the stand all shared a bond forged in the crucible of justice. Their work had brought an end to a nightmare, and in doing so, they had reinforced the fundamental promise of the law that no individual, regardless of their cunning or their ability to exploit the dark, is beyond the reach of the truth. The verdict was not just a resolution to a legal conflict. It was a moral affirmation of the sanctity of the individual and the right of every resident to live without the fear of predatory intrusion. As time moved forward, the details of the Bernard case began to transition from the realm of lived experience into the annals of legal history. It became a fixture in the training of new attorneys and a reference point for police procedures. Yet, the emotional resonance of the case remained. It was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of safety and the destructive power of a single individual when left to their own devices. It served as a testament to the importance of institutional perseverance. Had the police given up during the long, fruitless weeks of their stakeouts, or had the prosecution failed to push for the admission of the prior act evidence, the outcome could have been drastically different. The system had worked, but only because those involved refused to accept the status quo of fear. Reflecting on the totality of the case, one cannot help but be struck by the juxtaposition of the predator's primitive, animalistic behavior and the highly sophisticated, intellectual framework that was ultimately required to stop him. Bernard sought to reduce his victims to objects, to remove their agency, and to force them into a state of terrified compliance. He relied on the most basic and primal of tools: darkness, a blade, and the threat of violence. The law, by contrast, had to reach for its most elevated mechanisms: the rules of evidence, the precedents of the court, and the collective memory of the community. In this confrontation, the law prevailed. It reclaimed the power that Bernard had stolen, demonstrating that the structure and stability of a fair society are the ultimate shields against the chaos he represented. The story of the ASG housing complex during those years of 1993 and 1994 remains a pivotal chapter in the history of American Samoa. It is a story that refuses to be forgotten, not because of the notoriety of the perpetrator, but because of the resolve of those who stood against him. It remains a powerful narrative about the nature of justice in the face of deep, pervasive fear. It emphasizes that while the darkness may be where the predator hides, the light of scrutiny and the persistence of the law are the forces that ultimately uncover the truth. The case of Tolo Albert Bernard stands as a firm boundary marker in the territory's pursuit of safety, a testament to the enduring reality that even in the most isolated of places, the light of justice can reach into the deepest corners of the night. For all the women who were targeted, for the families who were shaken, and for the community that had to rebuild its sense of sanctuary, the conclusion of this case was not just an end. It was the beginning of a long process of healing that continues to influence the collective identity of the community to this very day, ensuring that the lessons learned in that courtroom are never lost to the passage of time. The courtroom atmosphere during the final sentencing and the concluding days of the trial was far removed from the terror that had once permeated the ASG housing complex. As the judicial process reached its terminal point, the gallery was filled with a mixture of solemnity and a profound sense of relief. The legal machinery, which had been set in motion by the tireless efforts of investigators and prosecutors, had functioned with the deliberate precision that justice demands. For Tolo Albert Bernard, the courtroom was no longer a stage for legal maneuvering or the defiance of the law. Instead, it had become the place where the reality of his actions was codified, formalized, and finalized. The verdict of guilty, delivered with such clarity by the jury, stripped away the aura of the mysterious, elusive predator and reduced his identity to that of a convicted felon, stripped of his power, his freedom, and the very cover of darkness that he had once so callously exploited. The sentencing phase, while procedural in nature, carried an emotional weight that reverberated throughout the room. It was the moment where the abstract concepts of guilt and punishment were given concrete reality, where the long, grueling process of holding the perpetrator accountable was fully realized. The defense, which had fought so tenaciously throughout the pretrial and main trial phases, found their arguments effectively neutralized by the overwhelming weight of the evidence that the court had allowed to be presented. The tactical decision to admit evidence of the prior bad acts had been the turning point, providing the jury with a comprehensive view of the defendant's behavioral signature. As the judge prepared to pass the final judgment, the focus of the proceedings shifted from the question of guilt to the question of the impact. The victim impact statements, though often quiet and restrained, were the most poignant part of this phase. They spoke of the deep, enduring trauma that had been inflicted not just on the individuals who were directly assaulted, but on the entire community of Tafuna. These statements served to ensure that the court understood that the crimes committed by Bernard were not merely discrete acts of violence, but were ripples that had disrupted the lives of many, creating a lasting atmosphere of fear and insecurity that had taken an immense collective effort to overcome. The judge, in delivering the final sentence, emphasized the gravity of the offenses and the necessity of isolating the perpetrator from the society he had so severely violated. The sentence was not just a punishment. It was a protective measure, a recognition that the safety of the public had been profoundly compromised and required a long-term, definitive safeguard. The decision to remand Bernard into the custody of the Department of Corrections for a significant period of time was received with a collective exhale in the courtroom. It was the conclusion of a chapter that had been defined by the struggle between the predator and the community, and the victory of the latter was now absolute. As Bernard was led away, his path out of the courtroom marked the end of his influence over the lives of his victims. He was no longer the phantom of the night. He was merely an inmate, a figure of the past whose influence was now restricted by the iron bars and concrete walls of the Pago Pago Correctional Facility. The investigation that had led to this outcome was a testament to the dedication of the Department of Public Safety and the forensic analysts who had worked tirelessly to piece together the evidence. Every fingerprint, every detail from the crime scenes, and every fragment of information collected during the stakeouts had played a vital role in building the case. The detectives who had waited in the humid, mosquito-infested nights of the housing complex saw the culmination of their labor in the finality of the verdict. They had risked their own safety and sacrificed their personal time to ensure that the streets of Tafuna would once again be safe for the residents. Their professionalism and unwavering commitment to the truth were the foundations upon which the success of the prosecution rested. The collaboration between the various departments of the law enforcement and the legal system had been seamless, proving that when the mechanisms of justice are aligned, even the most evasive of predators can be brought to account. The role of the prosecutor's office, in particular, deserves significant recognition for their foresight and legal acumen. By navigating the complexities of Rule 404(b) and successfully arguing for the admissibility of the prior bad acts, they had expanded the horizon of what was possible in the legal fight against serial predation. This was not just a victory for the current case, but a significant advancement for the entire legal profession in American Samoa. Their ability to articulate the signature methodology and convince both the judge and the jury of its validity required a high level of expertise and a deep understanding of human psychology and criminal patterns. They had successfully navigated the delicate balance between protecting the defendant's rights and ensuring that the needs of the victims and the community were fully met. The case set a standard that would be referenced and utilized by future generations of legal professionals who would find themselves faced with similar challenges. Following the sentencing, the community began to look inward, reflecting on the lessons that could be drawn from this traumatic period. The terror that had been experienced in the ASG housing complex had brought to light the importance of community awareness and the necessity of building robust support systems. It was a time of healing, a time for the residents to come together and rebuild the sense of unity that had been fractured by the actions of a single, malevolent individual. The shared experience of fear had been transformed, in the aftermath, into a shared resolve to protect one another. The residents began to take a more active role in neighborhood watch programs, ensuring that the lines of communication between neighbors were strong and that the security of their collective environment was always a priority. This shift in the community dynamics was perhaps the most enduring positive outcome of the entire ordeal. The trauma suffered by the victims, while deep, began to find a path toward resolution through the shared acknowledgement of their experiences. By testifying, they had not only provided the necessary evidence to secure a conviction but had also taken the power back from their attacker. Their bravery in the face of such profound violation was the true measure of their strength. The healing process for these individuals would not be short, but the assurance that justice had been served provided a crucial, stabilizing point in their lives. The support of the community, the professionalism of the counselors who assisted them, and the closure provided by the legal system all contributed to the steady, albeit difficult, process of reclaiming their lives. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extreme adversity. Reflecting on the totality of the case, one is struck by the stark reality of how fragile the fabric of society can be when faced with the actions of a determined predator. It was a time when the boundaries of home and safety were pushed to their limits, and yet, it was also a time when the strength of the community and the rigor of the law were brought to their full potential. The case of Tolo Albert Bernard stands as an important, albeit painful, reminder of the necessity of vigilance and the importance of holding fast to the principles of justice. It served to unify the various facets of the legal and social systems in American Samoa, creating a more responsive and resilient framework for addressing the challenges of criminal behavior. The narrative of the case, now fully captured within the judicial history of the territory, continues to serve as an important reference point. It highlights the importance of the initial response to reports of crime, the necessity of thorough investigation, and the critical role of legal strategy in ensuring that the truth is revealed, regardless of how deeply it might be hidden in the darkness. The legacy of this case is not defined by the actions of the perpetrator, but by the coordinated response of the community and the legal system that sought to contain him. It is a story that illustrates the enduring power of the truth and the unwavering commitment to justice that remains the bedrock of a civil society. As we look back at the conclusion of this trial, we are reminded that while the darkness may be where the predator hides, the light of scrutiny and the persistence of the law are the forces that ultimately uncover the truth. The story of Tafuna during those years remains a testament to the strength required to overcome profound trauma and the necessity of a system that can adapt and respond to the most complex of challenges. The final verdict for Tolo Albert Bernard was more than just the end of a trial. It was the assertion of the community's right to live in peace and the reaffirmation of the fundamental values that protect the dignity and safety of every individual. The closure provided by the verdict allowed the residents of the housing complex to finally leave the fear behind, ensuring that their lives would no longer be dictated by the presence of a phantom, but by the potential of a future reclaimed. The case remains a beacon, a clear indicator that even in the face of the most daunting of odds, the commitment to justice, when held firmly by a determined community and a professional legal system, will always prevail. The lessons learned in that courtroom are etched into the legal history of the territory, providing a guiding light for all those who strive to uphold the law and protect the sanctity of the home, regardless of the challenges they may face in the future. The final chapter of the Tolo Albert Bernard case is not defined by the conclusion of the trial, nor by the heavy doors of the Pago Pago Correctional Facility closing behind him, but by the slow, quiet process of reconciliation that followed within the community of Tafuna. To understand the true impact of these events, one must look beyond the sterile documentation of the courts and into the heart of the housing complex where the fear had once been palpable. For years, the memory of the phantom intruder acted as a persistent scar, a reminder of a period when the very definition of safety was challenged and dismantled. Yet, in the aftermath, this collective experience fostered a profound sense of communal resilience. The trauma, rather than permanently shattering the community, became a catalyst for a transformation in how neighbors engaged with one another, how the territory approached law enforcement, and how the victims were supported in their recovery. It was a testament to the fact that while an individual can inflict deep and lasting wounds, the strength of the community to heal and to secure its own future is an even more potent force. The legacy of these events is found in improved lighting that now illuminates the pathways of the housing complex, the increased awareness that residents carry into their daily lives, and the enduring memory of a time when justice was not just a pursuit, but a necessary reclamation of the peace that had been lost. As the years have passed, the legal precedent established by the Bernard case has become a bedrock of judicial practice in American Samoa. It has served as a critical reference point for attorneys and judges who find themselves navigating the complexities of cases where the evidence is subtle, behavioral, or largely circumstantial. The victory for the prosecution in admitting the prior bad acts evidence provided a clear and stable framework for future trials, ensuring that the legal system is equipped to handle even the most deceptive and elusive of offenders. This contribution to the body of law in the territory cannot be overstated. It represents an intellectual maturation, a realization that the legal system must be as dynamic and sophisticated as the challenges it faces. The Bernard case proved that the law is not a static set of rules, but a living, evolving mechanism capable of protecting the citizenry by adapting to the realities of criminal conduct, even when that conduct is shrouded in the most impenetrable of darkness. Reflecting on the psychological dimension of this ordeal, one must acknowledge the remarkable strength of the victims. Their willingness to come forward, to revisit their trauma in a public forum, and to confront the man who had violated their sanctity was an act of profound courage. They were the true authors of the justice that was ultimately achieved. Their stories, shared within the secure confines of the courtroom, served as the ultimate evidence of the predator's impact, grounding the legal arguments in the visceral reality of human experience. The process of their recovery, long and difficult, has been supported by a community that recognizes the importance of acknowledging the pain that was inflicted. In many ways, their resilience has become the hallmark of Tefuna, a symbol of the ability to withstand even the most terrifying of circumstances and to emerge with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper commitment to the well-being of others. The support networks that were created in the wake of the trials remain in place, a testament to the enduring recognition that trauma is a shared burden that requires a collective commitment to heal. The broader implications of this case for public policy and law enforcement in the territory have been equally significant. The necessity of collaborative effort between the community and the authorities was perhaps the most important lesson learned. The shift toward a more proactive, preventative approach to security in the government housing units was a direct response to the vulnerabilities identified during the investigation. The police department, having successfully navigated the challenges of the stakeouts and the legal complexities of the trial, emerged with a more sophisticated understanding of criminal behavior and a deeper engagement with the community they serve. This rapport, built in the shadow of fear and solidified in the pursuit of justice, has become a standard feature of the relationship between the people of Tefuna and their law enforcement officials. It serves as a constant reminder that safety is a shared responsibility, a covenant that requires the constant vigilance and cooperation of everyone involved. In the final analysis, the story of Tolo Albert Bernard is a reminder of the fragility of the peace we often take for granted. It highlights the potential for darkness to seep into even the most tightly knit of communities and the devastating consequences that follow. Yet, it is also a story that emphasizes the capacity of human beings to confront that darkness, to dissect it, and to hold those responsible for it accountable under the light of the law. The justice that was served in this case was not an abstract concept. It was a necessary restoration of order, a reassertion of the fundamental rights of every individual to live in safety and dignity. The memory of the trial will continue to serve as a beacon for the legal and judicial system of American Samoa, a constant reminder of the importance of persistence, the power of evidence, and the necessity of a community that refuses to surrender its peace to the actions of a predator. As the story fades into the historical narrative of the territory, it remains a powerful and poignant reminder of the enduring nature of human resilience. The lessons learned during those years of fear and struggle have been integrated into the institutional and social fabric of American Samoa, ensuring that the territory is better prepared to face the challenges of the future. The memory of the phantom who once haunted the halls of the ASG housing complex has been eclipsed by the memory of the community that stood up to him and the legal system that ensured he would no longer be a threat. It is a story of transition, from vulnerability to strength, from fear to resolve, and from the uncertainty of the night to the clarity of the truth. The closure that was achieved remains a foundational element of the community's identity, a testament to their unwavering commitment to protecting one another and to ensuring that the sanctity of their homes remains inviolate. The legacy of the Bernard case, therefore, is not a memory of the crime itself, but a celebration of the strength and the commitment of all those who stood against it, ensuring that the light of justice would always triumph over the darkest of nights. In considering the broader context of this case, one must also appreciate the sheer commitment of those who worked behind the scenes. The forensic technicians, the administrative staff in the prosecutor's office, the researchers who waded through historical records to build the signature profile, and the victim advocates who provided the quiet, steady support needed for the trials to proceed, all were integral to the outcome. Their roles, while perhaps less visible than those of the primary investigators or attorneys, were just as critical to the final verdict. This collective effort, characterized by professional excellence and a shared sense of duty, underscores the depth of the commitment required to serve the public trust. It is this depth of service, this willingness to go beyond the expected, that defines the integrity of the judicial process. The narrative of this case serves as a poignant reminder that while we may live in a world where individuals may choose to act with cruelty, we also possess the strength to create structures and systems that reflect our values of fairness and security. The case of Tolo Albert Bernard, with all its complexities and its challenges, stands as a clear example of that potential. It reaffirms that the law, when administered with integrity and supported by a resilient community, remains the most effective tool we have for protecting our peace. The final verdict for Bernard was not just an end to his criminal career, it was an affirmation of the community's right to determine its own future. As time continues to move forward, the details of this case will undoubtedly become a part of the foundational history of the territory, a story to be told to future generations about the importance of vigilance, the necessity of the rule of law, and the strength of a community that stands united. It is a legacy that ensures that the lessons learned, the sacrifices made, and the justice served will continue to serve as a guide for all those who seek to build a safer and more just society. In the end, the light that emerged from this period of darkness is the light of a community that has emerged stronger, more aware, and more committed than ever to the principles that hold a society together in the face of even the most daunting of trials. This is the ultimate, enduring conclusion of the Tolo Albert Bernard case, a victory of the human spirit and the rule of law over the darkness of predatory violence. The story of Tolo Albert Bernard serves as a mirror reflecting the inherent vulnerabilities of a peaceful society, but more importantly, it stands as a monument to the relentless pursuit of justice that defines a civilized community. As we look back upon the trajectory of the events that unfolded between 1993 and 1994, we are reminded that the security of a neighborhood like the American Samoa government housing complex is not guaranteed by the mere presence of locks and doors, but by the vigilant commitment of those who dwell within. The phantom who once stalked the corridors of Tafuna was driven by a dark, predatory compulsion, but he was ultimately outmatched by a system that refused to remain passive in the face of such profound and persistent evil. The final resolution of his case, through the meticulous application of the law and the courageous testimony of his survivors, represents a definitive triumph of order over chaos. It is a narrative that underscores the essential nature of the judicial process, demonstrating that when the law is applied with precision and moral clarity, it possesses the power to restore the sanctity of the individual and the stability of the collective. The lasting impact of the Bernard trial is perhaps most visible in the evolution of the legal landscape within the territory. By successfully implementing the Rule 404(b) exception to introduce evidence of prior bad acts, The prosecutors in this case provided a template for all future legal battles against serial offenders. This was not a minor procedural adjustment. It was a fundamental shift in how the court approached the issue of identification in cases of extreme, nocturnal predation. It demonstrated an understanding that the law must not be a hostage to the limitations of human perception in moments of crisis. By focusing on the signature of the crime, the legal team ensured that the essence of the perpetrator's intent was brought into the light, leaving no room for the ambiguity that the defense had so desperately sought to exploit. This precedent continues to stand as a vital instrument for justice, ensuring that the unique characteristics of predatory behavior remain a central, admissible, and powerful component of the state's case against those who believe they can escape the reach of the law through the clever use of shadows and silence. Beyond the technicalities of the courtroom, there remains the deeply personal journey of those who were forced to confront Bernard. Their experience reminds us that the violation of a home is a profound and lasting trauma that ripples outward, affecting families, neighbors, and the very sense of security that a community relies upon. The healing that has occurred in Tafuna is a process that has required time, patience, and a communal commitment to support those who were once the targets of such intense, calculated fear. The fact that this community has emerged from such an ordeal with a renewed sense of purpose and a stronger internal bond is perhaps the most significant victory of all. The Phantom did not succeed in breaking the spirit of Tafuna. Rather, he inadvertently strengthened it, forcing the residents to articulate their values and to take proactive steps to ensure that their homes would remain a place of refuge. The transformation of the housing complex into a more secure and connected environment is a tangible legacy of the struggle, a clear sign that the lessons learned during those dark years have been deeply and permanently integrated. Furthermore, the investigation itself remains a masterclass in law enforcement methodology. The decision to abandon traditional patrols in favor of a covert, intelligence-led stakeout operation was a turning point that proved the necessity of adapting to the rhythms and tactics of an elusive adversary. The patience and discipline required of the officers, who endured the oppressive heat and the psychological toll of the stakeouts, speak to the professionalism and dedication of the Department of Public Safety. Their work was not just about the eventual capture of Bernard. It was about the affirmation of the state's obligation to protect its citizens. The success of the investigation proved that even the most careful of predators can be defeated when the forces of law and order combine intuition, persistence, and a deep, rigorous commitment to the facts. The image of the police closing the net in the mud of the tropical brush serves as a powerful symbol of the eventual defeat of the darkness, a vivid illustration of the moment when the Phantom was forced to confront the reality of the consequences he had tried so hard to avoid. As we consider the broader narrative of this case, we are forced to grapple with the reality that serial predation is a challenge that can strike anywhere at any time, testing the resolve of even the most peaceful societies. The Tolo Albert Bernard case acts as a historical marker in the American Samoan experience, a point in time where the territory was forced to acknowledge the existence of a profound threat and to mobilize its entire judicial and civic infrastructure to meet it. This mobilization was not just an institutional response, it was a deeply human one. It was the collective response of a community that refused to surrender its safety to fear, and it remains a source of pride that the legal and social systems were able to meet the challenge with such effectiveness. The story remains as relevant today as it was in the mid-90s, a cautionary tale for those who might underestimate the importance of communal vigilance and the necessity of a robust, responsive, and principled justice system. The legacy of the Bernard trial is also one of professional and personal growth for those who stood on the front lines. The prosecutors who navigated the minefield of the 404B rule, the investigators who braved the darkness of the Tafuna night, and the survivors who faced their tormentor in court all share a bond that is rarely understood by the public. Their combined efforts created a foundation of justice that continues to protect the territory today. They provided a service that transcended the specific facts of the case, contributing to the development of a legal tradition that prioritizes the truth and the safety of the individual above all else. Their example continues to inspire new generations of legal professionals who enter the field with the understanding that the law, when used with integrity and vision, is the most powerful tool for ensuring that our homes remain the sanctuaries they are meant to be. The conclusion of this story is not merely an ending, it is a continuation of the peace that has been reclaimed. The housing complex at Tafuna, while no longer the site of the nightmare, remains a place where the memory of those years continues to inform the way in which residents look out for one another. The light that now shines upon the grounds of the complex is a metaphorical, as well as a literal, testament to the victory of the community. It is a light that reminds every resident that their safety is a shared, communal endeavor, and that they are never truly alone in their commitment to a peaceful, secure life. The finality of the sentence, the resolution of the legal battles, and the steady recovery of the victims have all contributed to a sense of closure that is both deep and enduring. In the final assessment, the case of Tolo Albert Bernard stands as an essential chapter in the history of the territory's commitment to justice. It is a narrative that confirms the capacity of a society to withstand the most intense and sustained of threats, provided it remains united and principled. The darkness that once threatened the peace of Tafuna was effectively dispelled by the persistence of those who refused to let it prevail. Their success is a legacy of empowerment, a reminder that the institutions we build and the community bonds we forge are the ultimate defenses against the shadows that occasionally seek to compromise our sense of security. As we reflect on these events, we are reminded that the price of peace is constant vigilance, and that the foundation of our safety is the unwavering belief that truth, once sought and fought for, will ultimately provide the clarity and justice that every society requires. The story of Tafuna during those years of trial is, therefore, a celebration of the strength of the law, the courage of the survivors, and the indomitable nature of a community that stood firmly together against the darkness and reclaimed its right to live in peace, ensuring that the lessons of the past will forever serve as a guiding light for the future of American Samoa. The final reflection on the Tolo Albert Bernard case necessitates a broader contemplation of the human capacity for resilience when confronted with the calculated, systematic destruction of one's personal sanctuary. As we close this narrative, we find ourselves acknowledging that the true history of this period is not merely written in the transcripts of the High Court or the archived police reports, but in the collective memory of the Tafuna community. This was an experience that fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the territory, shifting the perception of safety from an assumed state of being to an active, earned achievement. The transition from the paralyzing fear of the early 90s to the empowered, vigilant community that exists today is a profound transformation, one that underscores the necessity of institutional integrity and social cohesion. When a predator chooses to strike at the most private moments of a victim's life, the reaction of that individual and the society that stands behind them becomes the ultimate measure of their strength. The individuals who faced Bernard did not just survive. They endured, they testified, and they reclaimed their right to live without the shadow of his presence. Their courage provided the necessary momentum for the legal system to act, and in doing so, they provided a pathway to justice that had, until that point, remained elusive. The institutional legacy of this case remains equally significant. The judicial system of American Samoa, by engaging with the complexities of Rule 404(b), moved beyond a passive adherence to traditional norms and demonstrated the necessity of a nuanced, evidence-based approach to serial crime. This legal maturation was not achieved without significant debate and internal struggle, as the balance between the rights of the accused and the protection of the community was rigorously tested. Yet, the outcome set a standard that has continued to inform the legal practices of the region. The lessons regarding the identification and admission of behavioral evidence have ensured that subsequent investigators and prosecutors are far better equipped to address the challenges of sophisticated criminal patterns. By documenting the signature of the offender, the legal system created a mechanism of accountability that transcends the inherent difficulties of eyewitness testimony in dark, chaotic, and high-stress environments. This advancement is a testament to the fact that justice, when pursued with a commitment to both truth and rigorous procedural fairness, possesses the capacity to overcome the most determined attempts at evasion. We must also reflect on the role of the Department of Public Safety, whose commitment to the community was tested to its absolute limit. The decision to employ undercover, tactical stakeouts was a response to a crisis that demanded innovation. The dedication shown by the officers who navigated the difficult terrain and the long, grueling nights, often in the face of immense pressure from a terrified public, speaks volumes about their professional ethics. They were not merely responding to calls. They were anticipating the movements of a predator, showing a level of proactive engagement that served as the final check against Bernard's campaign of terror. The eventual arrest, occurring in the literal and metaphorical mud of the tropical night, was the climax of an investigation that demanded every ounce of their training and resolve. It remains a powerful illustration of the state's fundamental duty to protect its citizens and the capability of the public safety apparatus to adapt and succeed when faced with an unprecedented threat. The enduring impact on the victims remains the most vital aspect of the case. The trauma they experienced was a direct, violent attempt to strip them of their agency, yet the process of the trial allowed for that agency to be reasserted. By stepping into the courtroom and giving voice to their experiences, they transformed the narrative of their victimhood into a narrative of empowerment. This journey was not one that they undertook in isolation. It was supported by a community that recognized the weight of their sacrifice and the necessity of their justice. The subsequent creation of resources and support networks in the territory reflects a deeper, more empathetic understanding of the long-term impact of sexual violence and a commitment to ensuring that those affected have access to the care and guidance they deserve. This is the true measure of a society that has learned from its hardships, the ability to translate the experience of individual suffering into a collective commitment to empathy and support. As we look toward the future, the lessons of the Tafuna housing complex remain as relevant as ever. The importance of neighborhood cohesion, the necessity of lighting and infrastructure to discourage predation, and the importance of open lines of communication between the community and the authorities are all foundational elements of safety. The case reminds us that a predator relies on the isolation of the victim and, conversely, that the strength of a community is found in its connectedness. The vigilance that was born out of fear has matured into a protective, self-aware approach to communal living that remains a vital component of the local identity. The residents of Tafuna have proven that they are not mere inhabitants of their homes, but active guardians of the peace that they have so carefully rebuilt. The broader context of this narrative is one of hope and the potential for renewal. It is a story that proves that even when the darkness feels absolute, the light of human agency, legal rigor, and communal solidarity is sufficient to illuminate the truth and ensure that justice is served. The Tolo Albert Bernard case was a defining moment of maturity for American Samoa, a time when the territory had to face an extreme challenge and emerge with a more sophisticated and robust understanding of its own justice system and its social commitments. The closure provided by the verdict, the sentencing, and the subsequent healing has allowed the community to move forward, no longer tethered to the trauma of the past, but strengthened by the experience and the lessons learned. The legacy of this case is not a memory of the perpetrator's actions, but a celebration of the resilience of the survivors and the unwavering dedication of those who worked to ensure that his reign of terror was ended. In conclusion, the story of this period serves as a profound and enduring testament to the fundamental values of a civil society. It is a reminder that the law is not just a collection of statutes, but a reflection of a society's commitment to the sanctity of the individual and the peace of the collective. When we reflect on the trials of those years, we are not just remembering a series of crimes and their eventual resolution. We are acknowledging the strength of a community that stood firm in the face of an existential threat. The victory of justice in this case was a victory for the rights of every resident to live in safety and for the integrity of the judicial system that protects those rights. It remains a foundational truth that justice, when pursued with persistence, integrity, and communal support, will always provide the closure and the security that every society fundamentally requires. The lessons that were fought for and won in that courtroom are now a permanent part of the territory's history, providing a firm foundation for the ongoing pursuit of a safe and just environment for all. As the story concludes, we are left with the enduring image of a community that has found its voice, a legal system that has proven its capacity for adaptation and growth, and the lasting assurance that the pursuit of justice is the most essential and noble commitment of any society, regardless of the challenges it may face, ensuring that the light of truth remains the guiding force for the future. This is the final, definitive resolution of the case, and the enduring legacy that will continue to inform the identity and the resolve of the people of American Samoa for generations to come. The echoes of the Tolo Albert Bernard case have largely faded from the daily discourse of the American Samoa community, yet the structural and psychological foundations laid during that period continue to underpin the territory's approach to public safety and criminal justice. When we analyze the long-term historical arc of this case, it becomes evident that the courtroom was the site of a profound transition. It was here that the local legal system underwent a crucible of fire, forced to reckon with the limitations of its own traditions while simultaneously being presented with a demand for justice that could not be denied. The admission of prior bad acts, once a point of fierce contention, has now become a standard, almost routine, component of the prosecutorial toolkit, demonstrating how a single, high-stakes trial can reshape the judicial philosophy of an entire region. This case did more than just convict a serial predator. It redefined the standards of evidence and the expectations of the public regarding the state's ability to identify and neutralize threats that operate in the shadows. The legal precedents established during these proceedings continue to protect the integrity of the judicial process, ensuring that the fundamental rights of victims are balanced with the procedural necessities of the law in a way that prioritizes truth over technicality. The transformation of the Tafuna housing complex serves as a living monument to the enduring legacy of this ordeal. It is no longer defined by the terror that once permeated its hallways, but by the resilience of the families who chose to stay and rebuild their sense of security. The physical changes, such as improved lighting and more robust community surveillance, are merely the outward manifestations of a deeper, internal shift in the neighborhood's identity. The experience taught the residents that safety is not an external product delivered by the state, but a communal asset that must be nurtured through constant awareness and mutual support. This shift in the communal mindset is perhaps the most significant outcome of the entire affair. It transformed a group of residents into a unified community of guardians, each individual recognizing their role in the collective defense of their sanctuary. The shadow cast by Bernard's crimes ultimately served to highlight the light of the community's resolve, proving that while fear can be a powerful inhibitor, it can also be the catalyst for the creation of bonds that are far stronger and more resilient than the fear itself. The psychological path to recovery for the victims and their families remains a deeply personal, ongoing narrative that rarely finds its way into the formal archives of the case. Yet, it is this dimension of a story that provides the most profound insight into the cost of serial predatory violence. The trauma of having one's home, the most intimate of spaces, turned into a site of violation and fear is a burden that does not simply evaporate with a guilty verdict. The process of healing is, and has always been, a slow, nonlinear journey that requires sustained support and the acknowledgement of the profound violation that occurred. The legal system's recognition of this trauma, culminating in the victim impact statements and the sentencing, was a necessary step toward providing the closure required for these individuals to begin the process of reclaiming their agency. The fact that many of these victims were able to find a measure of peace in the years that followed is a tribute to their individual strength and the collective empathy of those around them. Their story is a reminder that the true definition of a successful legal outcome is not just the imprisonment of the perpetrator, but the restoration of the victim's ability to live their life without the constant, oppressive weight of the past. When we consider the professional lives of the men and women who worked the case, we see a generation of public servants who were fundamentally shaped by the experience. The investigators, who spent those long, exhausting nights in the undergrowth of Tafuna, carried with them a level of expertise and a commitment to detail that would define their future careers. The prosecutors who fought the uphill battle to admit the 404B evidence established a standard of legal excellence that remains a benchmark for the American Samoa Bar. Their work was driven by the understanding that the law is not a game of procedural technicalities, but a mechanism designed to protect the vulnerable from those who would use the cover of the night to prey upon them. This legacy of professional integrity and strategic innovation is the invisible architecture that continues to hold up the justice system today. It is a legacy of quiet competence, of the willingness to innovate in the face of an existential threat, and of the unwavering belief that the truth is always worth the effort required to uncover it. Looking back from the vantage point of the present, the Bernard case stands as a reminder that the threat of predatory crime is never truly extinguished. It is merely kept at bay by the vigilance and the preparedness of the community. The case has become a permanent feature of the territory's historical consciousness, a cautionary tale that underscores the necessity of constant institutional and social improvement. It is a story that refuses to let the lessons of the past become buried by the passage of time. Instead, it serves as a living, breathing guide for how to confront the challenges of the future. The institutional memory of the case ensures that the mistakes of the past are not repeated and that the successes are consistently improved upon. This commitment to continuous growth and responsiveness is what separates a truly resilient society from one that is merely reactive. The American Samoa of today, with its robust legal standards and its strong sense of community, is the direct descendant of the territory that had to confront the phantom of Tafuna 3 decades ago. In the final analysis, the narrative of this case is an affirmation of the rule of law as the primary guarantor of peace and security. It demonstrates that the law, when guided by the principles of justice and the commitment of those tasked with its administration, is the most powerful tool for ensuring the preservation of a civil society. The victory of justice in this case was not just an outcome of the trial. It was a victory of the fundamental belief that individuals have a right to exist without the threat of predatory intrusion. The resolution of the case, the imprisonment of the individual, and the subsequent recovery of the community all represent the final, definitive conclusion of this chapter. It is a conclusion that brings with it a sense of lasting peace and the comfort of knowing that the community was able to rise to the challenge, to overcome the fear, and to emerge from the experience with a deeper and more profound understanding of its own capacity for resilience. As we bring this account to a close, we acknowledge that the memory of the Tolo Albert Bernard case will remain, for as long as the people of American Samoa choose to remember it, a symbol of their unity and their strength. It is a story that has been told through the voices of the victims, the efforts of the investigators, the arguments of the prosecutors, and the resilience of the community. It is a story of human potential, of the ability to withstand the darkest of tests, and of the enduring importance of the truth as the primary light in our lives. The legacy of this case is one of empowerment, of the realization that when a community stands together and when the legal system is allowed to function with both rigor and empathy, there is no threat that cannot be met and no challenge that cannot be overcome. This is the definitive, the final, and the most enduring conclusion of the account, that the light of justice is the most significant and the most powerful force in our society, and it is the responsibility of every citizen, every public servant, and every member of the community to ensure that it continues to shine, regardless of the darkness that may occasionally seek to obscure it. For it is this light that guides us toward a future defined not by the shadow of our past, but by the promise and the potential of our shared commitment to one another. The finality of the Tolo Albert Bernard case is not marked merely by the passage of time or the quietude that eventually returned to the American Samoa government housing complex, but by the profound and enduring transformation of the collective consciousness within the territory. To truly understand the resonance of this case, one must appreciate how the resolution of such a crisis serves as a cornerstone for the ongoing construction of a safe and civil society. The narrative of those years, beginning in the suffocating dread of 1993 and concluding with the cold, hard reality of justice delivered in the mid-90s, represents a completed cycle of trauma, response, and recovery. In the end, the story is one of victory, not because the predator was caught, but because the community refused to be defined by his actions. The legacy is found in the quiet, steady lives of the residents of Tafuna today, who live in a space that has been reclaimed from the memory of violence and restored to a place of domestic sanctuary. The case has become an essential thread in the social fabric of American Samoa, a reminder that the bonds of a community are forged not only in times of peace, but, most significantly, in the crucible of adversity. The legal precedent established during these proceedings, the definitive application of Rule 404(b) as a means to link ritualized predatory behavior across time, stands as the most significant contribution to the territorial jurisprudence. It provided a clear, actionable methodology for the judiciary to handle the complexities of serial sexual predation, ensuring that the law remained a shield rather than an obstacle. For the attorneys and judges of American Samoa, this case serves as a permanent reference, a testament to the fact that the law is a living entity, capable of growth and adaptation when guided by the principles of equity and public protection. This intellectual legacy ensures that the fight for justice is never a static endeavor, but an evolving process, one that constantly seeks to provide better, more effective protections for the citizens of the territory. The judicial system, having successfully navigated the challenges of this case, emerged as a more sophisticated, confident, and responsive entity, ready to address the complexities of modern criminal conduct with the authority of established precedent and the wisdom of past experience. As we look back at the investigative efforts that were required to bring Bernard to justice, we see the profound importance of persistence and the willingness of law enforcement to break from convention. The undercover operations, the meticulous collection of behavioral evidence, and the intense collaboration between police and prosecutors were not merely successful tactics. They were the essential components of a strategy that recognized the unique danger of the perpetrator. The successful prosecution was a triumph of diligence over convenience. It demanded a level of commitment that went well beyond the standard expectations of public service, reflecting the deep-seated understanding that the safety of the community was paramount. The detectives and officers who stood watch in the darkness were the frontline defenders of that safety, and their efforts remain an inspiration to those who follow in their footsteps, a standard for the level of professional integrity required to effectively serve the public in the face of deep, pervasive fear. The story of the victims remains the most vital and poignant aspect of this entire account. Their individual and collective experiences of trauma and their subsequent paths toward healing are the truest measures of what was at stake in this trial. By transforming their trauma into testimony, they performed the ultimate act of public service. They took the fear that had been forced upon them and used it as a weapon against the man who had sought to destroy their autonomy. Their strength, revealed in the sterile, high-pressure environment of the courtroom, was the primary engine that drove the legal process forward. It is their resilience that truly defined the victory, as they refused to be silenced or defined by the violence they had endured. The ongoing support and empathy of the community for these survivors remain an essential part of the territory's social character, demonstrating a commitment to the well-being of the individual that is as strong as the commitment to the rule of law. When we consider the broader impact of this case on the territory's social character, we see a community that became more cohesive, more aware, and more deeply committed to the well-being of its neighbors. The Neighborhood Watch programs, the improvements in infrastructure, and the open lines of communication between citizens and the Department of Public Safety are the tangible, daily realities that resulted from the trauma of the past. These are not merely defensive measures. They are expressions of a new communal identity, one that values connection over isolation and mutual support over passive observation. The Tafuna of today is a place where residents are actively engaged in the maintenance of their own safety, a transformation that has rendered the possibility of a lone predator exploiting the shadows far less likely. This self-aware, proactive stance is the most robust shield that a community can build against the return of such terror. In reflecting on the totality of this historical event, we are reminded that the threat of predatory violence is a constant challenge to every society, but that the capacity for justice is equally permanent. The case of Tolo Albert Bernard stands as a firm boundary marker, a point of no return for the community's approach to public security. It forced a reassessment of the limits of the law and the responsibilities of the community, and it emerged with a strengthened resolve and a more effective framework for action. The memory of the event serves as a guide for all those who are tasked with the responsibility of upholding the peace. It is a cautionary tale that underscores the necessity of constant vigilance and a testament to the potential for justice to be realized, even in the most daunting of circumstances. The final resolution of the legal and social struggle is a triumph that belongs to everyone who participated in it, from the first responders who acted in the heat of the night to the jurors who weighed the evidence with such careful, sober judgment. The closure of the account is not just the end of a long narrative, but the final, definitive statement of a community that has found its path to peace. It is an affirmation that while the darkness may occasionally manifest in the form of predatory violence, the light of human agency, legal rigor, and collective resolve will always prove to be the stronger force. The legacy of these trials is a permanent, foundational element of the American Samoan identity, a story that will continue to be told to future generations as an illustration of the importance of resilience, the necessity of the law, and the fundamental value of the community in the pursuit of a safe and just society. We leave this account with the absolute assurance that justice was served, that the community reclaimed its sanctuary, and that the light of truth continues to serve as the guiding force for the people of this territory. This is the definitive conclusion, the lasting legacy, and the final word on the impact and the importance of the Tolo Albert Bernard case, a story that forever proves that when a society stands united in the defense of its values, it can overcome any darkness and emerge stronger and more unified than ever before. The pursuit of safety, justice, and the sanctity of the home is a never-ending journey, but the experience of this case has ensured that the people of American Samoa are better prepared, more united, and more deeply committed to that journey than they have ever been, ensuring that the peace they have worked so hard to reclaim will remain, for all time, the foundation of their future. The saga of Tolo Albert Bernard, while anchored in the specific geographic and temporal context of Tafuna during the early 1990s, transcends its local origins to become a universal study on the resilience of the rule of law. As we step back from the granular details of the investigation, the legal maneuvers in the High Court, and the harrowing experiences of the victims, we are left with a clear understanding of the broader mechanism of social restoration. The conclusion of this case did not merely signify the incarceration of an individual, it signaled the successful reassertion of order in a community that had been systematically destabilized. The darkness that once enveloped the ASG housing complex was not solely a product of the absence of light. It was a consequence of the systemic inability to identify and stop a predatory force that had learned to camouflage itself within the rhythms of the territory. By identifying the signature of that darkness, the justice system effectively illuminated the path forward, ensuring that the same shadow could never again find refuge in the ignorance of the law. The evolution of the legal precedent regarding Rule 404(b) remains the most profound institutional takeaway from this historical episode. It serves as a reminder that the law is not a rigid monolith, but a flexible instrument that must be wielded with both intellectual courage and ethical restraint. The prosecution's success in framing Bernard's past acts as a behavioral signature, rather than a character attack, was a masterstroke of legal strategy that has since become a cornerstone of criminal practice in the territory. This approach acknowledges that human patterns of criminality, especially those involving ritualized violence, are often the most reliable forensic evidence available when other avenues of investigation are closed. For future prosecutors, the Bernard case provides a roadmap for constructing cases that are built on the bedrock of behavioral logic. It ensures that the courtroom is not just a place where facts are presented, but where the deeper reality of an offender's methods is understood and utilized to ensure public safety. The transformation of the Tafuna community from a state of paralyzed vulnerability to one of empowered vigilance is perhaps the most humanizing aspect of this entire narrative. The residents, having survived a period of intense and sustained violation, transitioned into active stewards of their own security. This change in communal dynamics is a vital indicator of the territory's psychological maturation. The terror that was initially met with shock and disbelief was eventually confronted with a unified, collective resolve. This resolve is the true, lasting legacy of the Tafuna residents. They taught the territory that safety is not an abstract concept bestowed by authority, but a daily, iterative process of awareness, communication, and mutual protection. The improvements in infrastructure, while functionally important, serve primarily as symbolic reminders that the community is no longer willing to accommodate the vulnerability that allowed a predator to flourish in their midst. The victims of Bernard deserve the final word on the success of this justice. Their journey from the initial, traumatic encounters to their pivotal roles as witnesses in the High Court was a testament to a depth of character that is often obscured in the formal records of criminal justice. By choosing to speak, to recount, and to stand as the primary evidence against their attacker, they reclaimed the agency that Bernard had so brutally attempted to strip from them. Their participation in the trial was not merely a civic duty, it was an act of profound liberation. The legal closure they achieved was the final instrument needed to dismantle the psychological hold that the predator had exerted over their lives. The empathy and support provided by the legal teams, counselors, and community leaders ensured that this process was not one they endured in isolation, but one that was bolstered by the shared humanity of their fellow citizens. Furthermore, the investigative work undertaken by the Department of Public Safety stands as a benchmark for professional dedication. The transition to intelligence-led, covert operations was not merely a shift in tactics. It was a fundamental acknowledgement that the traditional model of law enforcement had been rendered obsolete by the nature of the threat. The officers who accepted the physical and mental toll of the stakeouts were the silent heroes of this restoration of order. Their patience, their discipline, and their ultimate success in the mud of the tropical night serve as a poignant reminder that even the most cunning of adversaries can be brought to justice when the state is committed to a strategy that is as intelligent, patient, and methodical as the predator it is seeking to contain. This dedication to the craft of investigation is the bedrock upon which the public trust is built. The broader historical importance of the Bernard case, viewed from the perspective of 3 decades, lies in its role as a formative event in the territory's judicial and social development. It was a time when American Samoa had to confront the reality that it was not immune to the types of serial predatory violence that have plagued communities around the globe. The territory's ability to rise to this challenge, to maintain the integrity of its legal system under such extreme pressure, and to emerge from the experience with a more sophisticated understanding of criminal justice is a matter of lasting significance. The case is a cornerstone of the territory's legal curriculum, a vital piece of the historical record that continues to guide the development of policies and procedures aimed at preventing similar incidents. It ensures that the knowledge acquired through the suffering of the Tafuna residents and the hard work of the investigators remains a permanent part of the local institutional memory. We must also acknowledge the lasting importance of the collaboration between the different branches of the justice system. The synergy between the investigators in the field and the prosecutors in the courtroom was the essential element of this victory. Without the precision of the investigative findings, the legal arguments would have lacked the necessary substance. Without the sophisticated legal strategy, the hard-earned evidence might have been excluded, leaving the community vulnerable to the continued presence of a predator. This successful partnership serves as a model for future cooperation, emphasizing that the mission of justice is a unified one, requiring the seamless integration of forensic, strategic, and human elements to be fully realized. It is a lesson in the efficacy of a coordinated state apparatus, one that is as essential today as it was in the mid-90s. As this narrative concludes, we are left with the undeniable conclusion that the Tolo Albert Bernard case was a turning point of immense historical and legal importance. It was the moment the territory moved from a state of reactive uncertainty to one of proactive, principled confidence in its own judicial capabilities. The resolution of the case did not just stop a perpetrator. It reinforced the promise that the law exists to protect the sanctity of the home and the dignity of the individual. This promise is the foundational element of a civilized life, and its reaffirmation through the successful conclusion of these trials provided a necessary and lasting foundation for the peace that continues to prevail. We look back at these events with a clear understanding that the work of justice is the most fundamental and demanding responsibility of any community. The legacy of the Tafuna housing complex during those years is a testament to the fact that peace, when reclaimed, is held with greater value and defended with greater vigilance. The residents, the officials, and the victims who participated in the successful prosecution of Bernard have left a lasting imprint on the identity of American Samoa. They have ensured that the territory remains a place where the rule of law is the primary arbiter of order and where the protection of the community is a shared and unwavering commitment. The story of those nights in Tafuna, of the struggle against the shadow and the final, definitive emergence of the truth, remains the final and most enduring lesson of the account. It is a story of how a community, when tested to the absolute limit, found the strength within itself to stand firm, to rely on the structures of the law, and to secure a future that is not defined by the fears of the past, but by the resilience of the present and the promise of a peaceful, just, and unified future for all, ensuring that the light of justice remains forever the guiding force of the territory's journey forward in the years to come.